Hello, welcome to 7th and 8th grade literature class. This is the Kloochman Rock, page 283 through 288. Let's get right in. Kloochman Rock, William O. Douglas. Though their experience and expertise at mountain climbing, the two boys had already overcome numerous obstacles in their attempt to reach the summit of the great Kloochman Rock. But then the ledge Bill was standing on gave way, and the only thing stopping him from plummeting to certain death was his painful grip on the narrow ledge above him. With his fingers crying out for relief, Bill wondered just how long he could hold on. Kloochman Rock stands on the southern side of the Teton Basin in the Cascades. It is an oval-shaped lava rock running lengthwise, southwestern by southeast, a half-mile or more. It rises 2,000 feet above the basin. The first third of the elevation is gained through gentle slopes of pine and fir. Next are a few hundred yards of tumbled rocks. Then there is a cliff rising to the sky, 1,200 feet or more, straight as a Washington Monument and over twice as high. I climbed Kloochman in the summer of 1948. My climb was a leisurely one. I worked my way up through these shrubs as I skirted the base of the rock and finally found on the east an easy incline leading to the top. As I sat on top of Kloochman that afternoon, I relived an earlier ascent of my youth, far from being so leisurely and peaceful. It was 1913 when Doug was 19 and I not quite 15. The two of us made this climb of Kloochman. Walter Cohagen, Doug, and I were camped at the Teton Basin at Soda Spring. The basin was then in a large part of a vast, rich bottomland. We were traveling light, one blanket each. The night, I recalled, was so bitter cold that we each took turns refueling the campfire so we would keep our backs warm enough to sleep. We arose at the first show of dawn and cooked frying pan bread and trout for breakfast. We had not planned to climb Kloochman, but somehow the challenge came to us as the sun touched her crest. After breakfast, we started circling the rock. There are fairly easy routes up Kloochman, but we shunned them. When we came to the southeast face, the one that has never been conquered, I believe, we chose it. Walter decided not to make the climb, but to wait at the base of the cliff for Doug and me. The July day was warm and cloudless. Doug led. The beginning was easy. For 100 feet or so, we found ledges 6 to 12 inches wide we could follow to the right or left. Some ledges ran up the rock 10 or more feet at a gentle grade. Others were merely steps to another ledge higher up. Thus, by hugging the wall, we could either ease ourselves upward or hoist ourselves from one ledge to another. When we were about 100 feet up the wall, the ledges became narrower and footwork more precarious. Doug suggested we take off our shoes. This we did, tying them behind us in our belts. In stocking feet, we wormed up the wall, clinging like flies to a dark rock. The pace was slow. We gingerly tested each toe hold and finger hold for loose rock before putting our weight on it. At times, we had to inch along sideways, our stomachs pressed tightly against the rock, in order to gain a point where we could reach the ledge above us. If we got on a ledge that turned out to be the cul-de-sac, the much more dangerous task of going down the rock wall would confront us. Hence, we picked our route with care and weighed the advantages of several choices which frequently were given us. At times, we could not climb easily from one ledge to another. The one above might be a foot or so high. We would have to reach it with one knee, slowly bring the other knee up, and then delicately balancing on both knees on the upper ledge, come slowly to our feet, pressing close to the wall and getting such purchase with our fingers as the lava rock permitted. In that torturous way, we made it perhaps 600 feet in 2 hours. It was late afternoon when we stopped to appraise our situation. We were in serious trouble. We had reached the feared cul-de-sac. So a cul-de-sac is a passage that doesn't have an ending. It's usually talked about a street with houses all the way around it that's a dead-end street. The 2 or 3 inch ledge on which we stood ended. There seemed to be none above us within Doug's reach. I was longer-legged than Doug, so perhaps I could have reached some ledge with my fingers if I were ahead, but it was impossible to change positions on the wall. Doug was ahead, and there he must stay. The problem was to find a way to get him up. Feeling along the wall, Doug discovered a tiny groove into which he could press the tips of the fingers of his left hand. It might help him maintain balance as his weight began to shift from the lower ledge to the upper one. But there was within reach not even a lip of a rock for his right hand. Just out of reach, however, was a substantial crevice, one that could hold several men. How could Doug reach it? Or I could not boost him, for my own balance was insecure. Clearly, Doug would have to jump to reach it, and he would have but one jump, since he was standing on a ledge only a few inches wide. He could not expect to jump for his handhold, miss it, and land safely. A slip meant he would go hurtling down some 600 feet onto the rocks. After much discussion and indecision, Doug decided to take the chance. He asked me to do him a favor. If he failed and fell, I might still make it, since I was longer-legged. Would I give certain messages to his family in that event? I nodded. Then listen carefully. Try to remember my exact words, he told me. Tell Mother that I love her dearly. Tell her I think she is the most wonderful person in the world. Tell her not to worry, that I did not suffer, that God willed it so. Tell Sister that I have been a little mean devil, but that I have had no malice towards her. Tell her I love her too, that someday I wanted to marry a girl as wholesome and cheery and good as she. Tell Dad I was brave and died unafraid. Tell him about our climb in full detail. Tell Dad I have always been very proud of him and that someday I have planned to be a doctor too. Tell him I lived a clean life and that I never did anything to make him ashamed. Tell Mother, Sister, and Dad I prayed for them. Every word burned into me. My heart was sick, my lips quivering. I pressed my face against a rock so Doug could not see. I wept. All was silent. A pebble fell from the ledge on which I squeezed. I counted seconds before it hit, 600 feet below with a faint, faraway tinkling sound. Would Doug drop through the same space? Would I follow? When you fall 600 feet, you die. Do you die before you hit the bottom? Closing my eyes, I asked God to help Doug up the wall. In a second, Doug said in a cheery voice, "Well, here goes." A false bravado took hold of us. I said he could do it, and he said he would. He wiped first one hand and then the other on his trousers. He placed both palms against the wall. He bent his knees slowly, paused a split second, and jumped straight up. It was not much of a jump, only 6 inches or so, but that jump by one pressed against a cliff 600 feet in the air had daredevil proportions. I held my breath. My heart pounded. The suspense was over. Doug made the jump, and in a second was hanging by 2 hands from a strong, wide ledge. There was no toe hold. He would have to hoist himself by his arms alone. He did just that. His body went slowly up as if pulled by some unseen winch. Soon he had the weight of his body above the ledge and was resting on the palms of his hands. Then he put his knee on the ledge, rolled over on his side, and chuckled as he said, "Nothing to it." A greater disappointment followed. Doug's exploration of the ledge showed he was in a final cul-de-sac. There was no way up. There was not even a higher ledge he could reach by jumping. We were now faced with the nightmare of going down the sheer rock wall. We could not go down frontwards because the ledges were too narrow and the walls too steep. We needed our toes, not our heels, on the rock, and we needed our stomachs pressed tightly against it. Then we could perhaps feel our way. But as every rock expert knows, descent of a cliff without ropes is often much more difficult than ascent. That difficulty was impressed on us by the first move. Doug had to leave the ledge he had reached by jumping. He dared not slide blindly to the skimpy ledge he had just left. I must help him. I must move up the wall and stand closer to him. Though I could not possibly hold his weight, I must exert sufficient pressure to slow his descent and to direct his toes upon the narrow ledge from which he had just jumped. I was hanging onto the rock like a fly, 12 feet or more to Doug's left. I inched my way toward him, first dropping to a lower ledge, then climbing to a higher one, using such toe holds as the rock afforded, and edging my way along crabwise. When I reached him, I said, "Now I'll help." Doug lowered himself and hung by his fingers full length. His feet were about 6 inches above the length from which he had jumped. Now he was my responsibility. If he dropped without aid or direction, he was gone. He could not catch and hold to the scanty ledge. I had little space for maneuvering. The surface on which I stood was not more than 3 inches wide. My left hand unfortunately found an overhead crevice that gave a solid anchor in case my feet slipped. I placed my hand in the small of Doug's back and pressed upward with all my might. "Now you can come," I said. He let go gently, and the full weight of his body came against my arm. My arm trembled under the tension. My left hand hung onto the crack in the rocks like a grappling hook. My stomach pressed against the wall as if to find mucilage in its pores. My toes dug in as I threw every ounce of strength. Down Doug came, a full inch. I could not help glancing down and seeing the rock 600 feet below. Down Doug moved another inch, then a third. My left hand seemed paralyzed. The muscles of my toes were aching. My right arm shook. I could not hold much longer. Down came Doug a fourth inch. I thought he was headed for destruction. His feet would miss, the only toe hold within reach. I could not possibly hold him. He would plunge to his death because my arm was not strong enough to hold him. The messages he had given me for his family raced through my mind, and I saw myself sick and ashamed standing before them, testifying to my inadequacy, repeating his last words. "Steady, Doug. The ledge is a foot to your right." He pawed the wall with his toes of his foot, searching. "I can't find it. Don't let go." The crisis was on us. Even if I had been safely anchored, my cramped position would have kept me from helping him much more. I felt helpless. In a few seconds, I would reach the physical breaking point, and Doug would go hurtling off the cliff. I did not see how I could keep from slipping and yet maintain my own balance. I will never know how I did it. But I tapped some reserve and directed his foot onto the ledge from which he had jumped earlier. I did it by standing for a moment on my left foot alone and then using my right leg as a rod to guide his right foot to the ledge by his swinging feet had missed. His toes grabbed the ledge as if they were the talons of a bird. My right leg swung back to my perch. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yes," said Doug. "Good work." My right arm fell from him, numb and useless. I shook from exhaustion and for the first time noticed that my face was wet with perspiration. We stood against the rock in silence for several minutes, relaxing ourselves and regaining our composure. "Doug," I said, "let's throw our shoes down. It will be easier going." So we untied them from our belts and dropped them to Walter Cogan, who was waiting at the rock field below us. Our descent was painfully slow but uneventful. We went down backwards, weaving a straight pattern across the face of the cliff as we moved from one side to the other. It was perhaps mid-afternoon when we reached the bottom, retrieved our shoes, and started around the other side of the rock. We had to leave the southeast wall unconquered, but being young, we were determined to climb the rock. So once more we started to circle. Then we came to the northwest wall. We selected it as our route. Here too is a cliff rising 1,000 feet like some unfinished pyramid. But close examination shows numerous toe and finger holds that make starting at least fairly easy. We set out with our shoes on. Again, it was fairly easy going for 100 feet or so. When Doug, who was up ahead, came to a ledge to which he could not step, the day's success of the climb depended on this point on Doug's short legs alone. The ledge to which he must move was up to his hip, and there were few finger holds overhead, and none of them firm enough to carry his whole weight. Only a few tiny cracks were within reach to serve as purchase for him. But Doug would not give up. He hitched up his trousers and grasped a tiny groove of rock with the tips of his fingers on his left hand, pressed his right hand flat against the smooth rock wall as if it had magical sticking power. Slowly, he lifted his knee high until it was slightly over the ledge above him. To do so, he had to stand on tiptoe on his right foot. Pulling with his left hand, he brought his knee up. Doug was now on both knees on the upper ledge. If he could find a good purchase overhead for his hands, he was safe. His hands explored the wall above him. He moved them slowly over most of it without finding a hold. Then he reached straight above his head and cried out, "This is our lucky day!" He had found a strong enough edges of the rocks, and on this, quickly he pulled himself up. His hands were on a ledge a foot wide. He lay down on his stomach and grasped my outstretched hands. The pull of his strong arm against the drop of 100 feet or more was as comforting an experience as any I can recall. In a jiffy, I was at his side. We pounded each other on the shoulders and laughed. My own most serious trouble was yet to come. For a while, Doug and I were separated. I worked laterally along the ledge to the south, found easier going, and in a short time was 200 feet or more up the rock wall. It was above Doug 20 feet or so, and 50 feet to his right. We had been extremely careful to test each toe and finger hold before putting our trust in it. Kloochman is full of treacherous rocks. We often discovered thin ledges that crumbled under pressure and showered handfuls of rocks and dust down below. Perhaps I was careless, but whatever the cause, the thin ledge on which I was standing gave way. I felt it slip. I grabbed for a hold above me. The crevice I seized was solid, but there I was, hanging by my hands 200 feet in the air, my feet pawing the rock. To make matters worse, my camera had swung between me and the cliff when I slipped. It was a crude and clumsy instrument, a box type that I carried on a leather strap across my shoulders. Its hulk was actually pushing me from the cliff. I twisted in an endeavor to get rid of it, but it was firmly lodged between me and the wall. I yelled to Doug for help. At once, he started edging toward me. It seemed hours, though it was probably not more than a few minutes. He shouted, "Hang on, I'll be there." Hang on I did. My fingers ached beyond description, and they were frozen to the rock. My exertion was pawing my feet, had added to the fatigue. The ache of my fingers extended to my wrists and then along my arms. I stopped thrashing around and hung like a sack, motionless. Every second seemed a minute, every minute an hour. I did not see how I could possibly hold. I would slip, I thought, slip to sure death. I could not look down because of my position, but mind's eye saw a sharp outline in the jagged rocks that seemed to be pulling toward them. The camera kept pushing my fingers from the ledge. I felt them move. They began to give way before the pull of a great force too great for flesh to resist. Fright grew in me. The idea of hanging helpless 200 feet above the abyss brought panic. I cried out to Doug's, but the words caught in my dry throat. I was like one in a nightmare who struggles to shout, who's then seized by fear that promises to destroy him. Then it flashed through my mind, a family scene. Mother sitting in the living room talking to me, telling me what a wonderful man Father was. She told me of his last illness and his death. She told me of his departure from Cleveland, Washington to Portland, Oregon for what proved to be a fatal operation. Her last words were, "If I die, it will be glory. If I live, it will be grace." The panic passed. The memory of those words restored reason. Glory to die? I could not understand why it would be glory to die. It would be glory to live. But as Father said, it might take grace to live, grace for one more powerful than Doug or I. And so again, that day I prayed. I asked God to save my life, to save me from destruction on this rock wall. I asked God to make my fingers strong and give me strength to hang on. I asked God to give me courage, to make me unafraid. I asked God to give me guts, to give me the power to do the impossible. My fingers were as numb as flesh that is full of Novocaine. They seemed detached from me, as if they belonged to someone else. My wrists, my shoulders cried for respite from my pain. It would be such a welcome relief if they could be released from the weight that was on them. Hang on! You can't hang on. You are a weakling. The weaklings die in the woods. Weakling, I'll show you. How long must I hang on? All day? Okay, all day then. I'll hang on. I'll hang on. Oh, dear God. Help me hang on. I felt someone pushing my left foot upward. It was Doug, as if a dream was in his voice saying, "Your feet are 18 inches below your toe hold." Doug found those toe holds for my feet. I felt my shoes resting in solid cracks. I pulled myself up and leaned on my elbows on the ledge to which my hands had been glued. I flexed my fingers and bent my wrists to bring back to life. Doug came up abreast of me. We're even Steven now. Even Steven? Each of us has saved the other's life. It was only shortly above the place where Doug had saved my life that we discovered a classic path up Kloochman. There was a 3-sided chimney chute, a few feet wide, that leads almost to the top. There are several such chutes on Kloochman. To negotiate the chute, we took off our shoes and tied them to our belts. We climbed the chute in stocking feet, pressing our hands and feet against opposing walls as we kept our backs to the abyss below us. This day we went up the chute with ease, stopping every 8 feet or so to measure our progress. The sun was setting when we reached the top. We were gay and buoyant. We talked about the glories of the scene in front of us. We bragged a little bit about our skill in rock work, how we must be a part mountain goat when we reached the top. We shouted and hallooed to the empty meadows before us. On Kloochman Rock that afternoon, both Doug and I valued life more because death had passed so close. It was wonderful to be alive, breathing, using our muscles, shouting, seeing. We stayed briefly at the top. We went down as we came up in stocking feet. We raced against the darkness, propelled by the thought of spending a night on Kloochman's treacherous wall. On the road leading back to camp, Doug said, "You know, Bill, there's power in prayer." That night I prayed again. I knelt on a bed of white fir boughs beside the embers of the campfire and thanked God for saving Doug's life and mine, for giving us the strength to save each other. This is the end of Kloochman Rock.